2021 is coming to a close, and it was certainly a unique year in politics. The legislature trying to get the state's business done while also navigating COVID. This morning, a look back at the major pieces of legislation passed, plus what 2022 has to offer, including a very big election year for the state. A look back and a look ahead with the reporters of the roundtable. Joining us this morning, Hartford Courant Capitol Bureau Chief Chris Keating, political writer and State House reporter for the Associated Press, Susan Haig, and co-founder of the CT Mirror and Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Pazniokis. It's all today on The Real Story. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Jen Bernstein. Well, 2021 seems like a whirlwind. It kicked off with a new president, President Joe Biden, sworn into office, and a new legislature here at home. And yes, we began the year with COVID and are ending it with COVID, still a major stressor in our lives. Here's a look back at this year in Connecticut politics. 2021 proved to be different from the start. Connecticut's legislature sworn in January 6th outside in the cold. Protesters greeting them over a number of issues on the pandemic, social justice, as well as a large group protesting against repealing vaccine exemptions. Governor Lamont giving his state of the state remotely.
2 years ago, as your new governor, you welcomed me into the room where it happens. This year, that room has become a virtual room.
This all happening on the same day crowds were gathering in Washington, D.C., the insurrection at the Capitol happening later in the afternoon. But back here at home, new rules were put in place on voting for Connecticut lawmakers, including allowing them to vote from their cars as the legislature worked to safely return the previous year's session canceled due to COVID. Lawmakers trying to make up for lost time, passing major pieces of legislation, answering the nationwide calls for social justice and tackling systemic racism. Connecticut passed the Clean Slate Bill, which wiped away certain convictions, misdemeanors, and lower-level felonies after a set time period. And in bipartisan legislation, lawmakers declared racism a public health crisis. Connecticut also became the 8th state to put the Crown Act on the books.
But when is hair just hair? Hair is never just hair. It's culture, it's pride.
The Crown Act makes it illegal to discriminate against hairstyles that are historically associated with race. Lawmakers also tackling the much-heated debate over repealing the religious exemption for vaccinations. Despite years of emotional protests, lawmakers did away with it, grandfathering in any kids who are using the religious exemption if they're already enrolled in public schools. The legislature also tackling domestic violence, passing a bill nicknamed Jennifer's Law, which expands the definition of domestic violence to include coercive control. It was named after Jennifer Dulos, who is presumed dead, and Jennifer Magnano, who was killed by her husband in front of her children. And after years of back and forth, the legislature finally made recreational marijuana legal despite Republican opposition.
We're going to have a product that is legal for adults, taxed and regulated.
I think that we will regret this decision years to come. I mean, it's similar to what we're seeing in Colorado, where they are trying to put that genie back in the bottle.
But in bipartisan legislation, Connecticut made sports betting legal in our state last spring. Connecticut's 2 federally recognized tribes, as well as the Connecticut Lottery, offering in-person as well as online betting on your favorite sports teams, as well as certain casino games. People able to place their first bets starting in October. In other political news, a scandal rocked West Haven involving COVID funding. State Representative Michael DeMassa, a city employee at the time, as well as another city employee arrested by the FBI, accused of stealing COVID relief funding. That put the mayor's administration in the hot seat during November's local elections. Mayor Nancy Rossi winning in a recount and denying any involvement.
And I was the one that then went and reported it to our auditors and another agency when I did find it so that it would stop.
Republicans showed well during November's municipal elections, which some say is a warning sign for Democrats as we head into a big political year. Connecticut's congressional seats, legislature, as well as the governorship up for grabs November 2022. And Connecticut will be voting on one of its 2 U.S. Senate seats. Senator Richard Blumenthal's seat up for re-election and will be in the hands of voters. A lot to talk about this morning with the reporters of the Roundtable. They are back to break down the year that was for us and also to look ahead. Joining us today, political writer and State House reporter for the Associated Press, Susan Haig, the Current's Capitol Bureau Chief Chris Keating, and co-founder of the CT Mirror and Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Pasniokis. Thank you all so much for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with just this being a strange year because of COVID, right? You know, one thing that I didn't get to touch on in that piece is the fact that the Capitol has been closed to the public, and this was pretty controversial and still is controversial. Chris, right?
Yes, there have been some people who've been clamoring to get the Capitol back open. The press corps has been allowed in there. We have badges and we can get in there, but it's an eerily quiet place on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes on a day-to-day basis, you might just have the governor's staff in there. So it does not have the regular hurly-burly of the very, very busy times of the Capitol. Anybody who has been there, the cafeteria has not really been open since March of 2020. The lobbyists aren't there. So yes, and the Republicans have been pushing to reopen the Capitol, kind of back to its normalcy, if you will. But the Democrats have said it's a little bit too dangerous. So I guess we'll see what unfolds for 2022.
Yeah, Susan, what is the status right now? I know that House Speaker Matt Ritter had mentioned that they were going to be looking at reopening the Capitol at some point next legislative session. But, you know, we see the numbers right now. We know Omicron is spreading like wildfire. What's the outlook that you're hearing?
I don't know if they've made a decision yet because things are changing, as you say, like almost every day. They did allow people to come in on the first floor, so that let people have sort of a taste of what it's like. But I've heard from a lot of people that still kind of like the idea of being able to participate remotely, having hearings on Zoom, and allowing people to testify that way. Perhaps we might have another mixture coming into the new session.
Yeah, very true. And if anyone at home wants to view these hearings, they can view them online, correct?
Yes, actually, it's kind of it's been sort of beneficial in some ways because you have a lot of this stuff on YouTube now, in addition to CTN. So there seems to be a lot more of this stuff being covered in some ways.
Yeah, because it's even more accessible, I guess, if you look at it that way, to anyone who's just sitting in their home. Mark, what is your take on how lawmakers have navigated COVID? We have to talk about also the governor's extended powers, right? I mean, is there another year that you can think of that compares to this?
No. We have seen an evolution of this governor over his 3 years. We've had 3 very different years. The first year, which was a normal year as far as access, and he did very poorly. He had very poor relationships with the General Assembly. He badly mishandled his major policy initiative in 2019, highway tolls. And then came COVID in March of 2020. And he found his footing, quite frankly, as a governor. He did quite well without having to deal with the legislature day in and day out. The polls certainly reflected that. At the end of 2020, he had come back. He began the year as one of the least popular governors in the United States. And he ended the year as one of the high performers, at least among as far as job approval rating goes. This year was a hybrid. He did play a role in some of the largest bills to pass, 2 of which you certainly highlighted. The legalization of sports betting, which was many years in the making, a very complicated undertaking, and that he also had to negotiate with the tribes and then find the votes to pass. The same is true for legalization of recreational cannabis. This year, there is a split, I think, between House and Senate leaders about reopening the building. It's the Senate Democrats, I think, are more inclined to try to limit access. The House Democratic majority seems to be more comfortable with reopening the building to at least a greater degree than we've seen. To Sue's point, I think she's right. We're going to see a continuation, I think, of some kind of hybrid hearings. People complained about a lack of access, but in some ways it was more access. There were people who were able to participate in hearings from their homes. You know, you have to wait hours at a time for the privilege of speaking for 3 minutes. I think it probably was a very attractive undertaking to do so from your kitchen, waiting your turn.
Yeah, I mean, how do they go backwards from that? Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like from here on out, if they hold, well, obviously they're going to be holding in-person hearings always, but if they allow people back in at some point, I mean, you must continue to make these hearings accessible, right, Chris?
Yeah, I think I would agree that I think we will see a hybrid. In other words, if and when the building is completely open as it was in the old days, meaning 2019 and prior, you could allow people to come in, say you have 50 people want to testify. But I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle. In other words, I think, for example, the budget hearings at night, the appropriations hearings, you could run it and say, these 50 people are here, can do it. But if you want to sign up for Zoom, another 50 people on Zoom, and the legislators would have to listen to it. I think it would be harder to cut people off if somebody, for example, lives in Stamford and it's a night hearing in Hartford. I think people would allow them to be on Zoom. So there's no question that more people testified on Zoom than otherwise would have happened. We had some hearings that went for 24 hours because there were so many people. So I think it would be hard to roll that back, but that will be up to the legislature.
Interesting. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, what priorities has the governor and the legislature laid out for 2022? What's coming down the line? And yes, we are heading into a big election year. The reporters of the Roundtable will be right back after this.